Today we are going to be talking about all the things we've been hearing over on social media about rules changes, ideas, people are bringing up problems, and I wanted to talk about a few of them and give my thoughts on the likes of Devastating Wounds, Fate Dice, and all the other stuff that has been discussed quite a lot. So how about we get into the video? If you want to support what I do, check out the links down in the description, give a thumbs up, subscribe if you enjoy what you're seeing, and my name is T-Flash, and this is Empire of Wargames. Alright, so a couple of days have passed. I personally have played 6 games of Warhammer 40,000 10th edition with different armies. 2 of them with Death Guard and the other ones with different armies like Drukhari, Space Marines and all that good stuff. And a lot of people have brought up a lot of problems when it comes to the rules. And they've shared their thoughts over on social media, and have also emailed the Warhammer community team or whatever that email actually leads to. But it's apparently worth using, so you should do it too if you have any thoughts that you would like to share with the Warhammer team. And a lot of thoughts have been brought up, and I thought, let's talk about them. Let's talk about Devastating Wounds, Fate Dice, and all that good stuff, and discuss how those should be changed and bring up ideas and talk about whether they are actually broken or not. So the big elephant in the room are the Aeldari with their knights, with their support turrets, and with 3 fire prisms. There is a ton of damage in there. There are a ton of mortal wounds in there, and the output and the damage output in general is frankly not it doesn't make any sense. It's way too high. And I think that this is also a problem with the Aeldari, but it is also a problem with how Devastating Wounds work. So it is kind of an umbrella kind of topic we are going to talk about. We are going to be talking about Devastating Wounds, the Aeldari, their units, and a little bit of their Fate Dice. So the first thing I've seen after a lot of people playing Aeldari and against them, and they've got shot by 20 mortal wounds from a single model, is that Fate Dice should be changed, and that those Fate Dice should not affect any special rules. So no sustained hits, no devastating wounds, no nothing. And while I think that this would be a band-aid fix, and it would fix it, I think that would be a terrible way to go about it. Because remember, if you've seen my last video, if not, I recommend you watch it. Fun is at the very top of whatever you're doing when designing the game and when playing the game. And if you remove the one thing that is a cool interaction with Fate Dice, namely triggering cool special abilities, considering the fact that you've rolled a couple of 6s, and you can reroll them, of course, and you can generate more of them, but generally, getting rewarded for having those 6s lying around should be there, and it should not be removed. I think that Fate Dice should be changed in a different way. You have no limit on how many Fate Dice you use. Miracle Dice, meanwhile, I think have a limit of once per phase, and I think that would be a fine limit, for example, or at least 1 dice per dice roll or something, so you cannot alter 20 saves or 3 different damage results from a single kind of firing action or something. There needs to be some kind of limiter there, or at least that would be an easy idea and an easy way to fix the problem. But also you can spin the problem further and say, okay, you look at Devastating Wounds, which is the core problem of everything, and say, how can we change Devastating Wounds? And a lot of people admittedly brought up a really good idea. Normally, the mantra for game developers, and I talked about that in the last video as well, is that you bring up a problem as someone from the community, and the problem you're bringing up is valid. It makes sense, and what you're talking about definitely should be talked about. But the way that the community wants to fix the problem is usually not the way you should do it. This time around, I actually agree with the community when they're saying a Devastating Wound should not replace the regular damage stamp and everything else, because currently it is the way that you trigger a Devastating Wound, the damage sequence ends, and you just deal your damage in mortal wounds. And what it should be is that you deal 1 mortal wound on top of your regular damage. So there's a save in between there and everything. And that would be way better, way more manageable, and way more understandable. And if GW and their designers feel like there is a lack of granularity, at that point, they could introduce Devastating Wounds X. So Devastating Wounds 1, 2, 3, whatever they want to do with that. So there are options there, and there's granularity to be had as well. And I think that is a very elegant solution to a problem that stems simply from anti-whatever, which is triggering devastating wounds easier, and high damage weapons triggering devastating wounds and thus delivering 6, 8, 9 mortal wounds in a single strike. And that is just way too much. And yeah, having that save in between, having invulnerable saves applying, and all that good stuff would do a lot of good for just the rule in general. So my opinion here for now is that when we talk about fate dice and so on, fate dice should be left alone, except if you wanted to maybe change the frequency at which you can use them. That would be fine with me. That wouldn't alter the fun too much of fate dice. But as soon as you remove the fate dice's ability to affect special rules like sustained hits and so on, fate dice are losing all flavor and they are super boring, like incredibly boring. So I would take a step back from that idea and instead alter devastating wounds and the frequency of which you can use fate dice. That would be a great first step to balancing the Aeldari. And furthermore, you need to look at the units that we are talking about in a differentiated way. So what is it about the Wraith Knight that is really strong? The rules, the durability, all the other weapons, nothing about the Wraith Knight is anything special. The Wraith Knight itself actually really damn bad. But what makes the Wraith Knight currently are Wraith Cannons. That is the singular reason why people want Wraith Knights to go up in points. I would not make Wraith Knights go up in points. I would change Wraith Cannons. That is literally all you have to do. As I said in a previous video, I had the chance to talk a little bit about Warhammer 40,000 with some of the designers. That was a year ago or something. But still, we talked about it and there was a lot of talk about pinpointing changes and just trying to change that singular thing without affecting anything else. That is the ideal scenario at which you alter the game. And here it is very easy, very transparent. You don't change anything about the Wraith Knight. The Wraith Knight is fine at 370 points. What you do change is the Wraith Cannon. And that is it. Pinpoint change, perfectly fine. If you also change devastating wounds and so on, and fate dice, at that point, you need to make decisions and check it out. Because what a lot of people are understandably scared of is that the Aeldari are now wrecking house and they are going to pay quote unquote for their sins of the start of 10th edition. And it is not a saying that people bring lightly. That has been a thing with GW and, you know, the army design and the way they look at rules. Whenever an army was very, very strong, they usually really suffered in the following editions or in the following updates. And I hope that this is not going to happen with the Aeldari. The Aeldari right now are very strong. They are probably, if you run the optimal list, you technically cannot lose. The only way to lose is a mirror match, and at that point you just end the match at the point where you determine who starts. The person who starts the game wins. That is how good their mortal wound output is currently and how cheap some of their units are. We are going to get to that. But the Wraith Knight itself, please just change the Wraith Cannon and maybe make it change to devastating wounds. The change to devastating wounds is going to affect everyone, and I think for the better. And for the Wraith Knight, just changing the Wraith Cannon is going to make the entire unit a lot more usable and more playable. Just don't make it useless. Next up, let's talk about the other problematic units. So first up, we have support turrets. Support turrets have been already nerfed and limited. Previously, at the very start of the edition or before it actually even released, you could bring 9 of them. Then GW limited it to just 3, which is fine. The support weapons are still pretty good, but overall, with a tiny change to maybe the weapon or maybe a tiny change to points, I think they would be fine. When it comes to the fire prisms, I think the fire prisms in their efficiency and their strength are at the right level. If you fix everything else I talked about over the past couple of minutes, that would make already a huge change on them. The biggest problem they have is not the weapons, it's not how hard they hit, it is their points. Aeldari are usually very squishy, and the Fire Prism is no exception. You can hide them. If you run 3 of them, you can make use of their special rule, where you just need to have one of them out and the others can shoot through that singular unit, and that is good. But overall, they are still very squishy, and that is what the Eldar are about. They are super hard hitting, but, you know, squishy and fast. And I think that should be kept. But as it stands, the Fire Prism at, 125 points or something is way too cheap. I think would probably see play if you would up the points by approximately 50. So that is the cautious first idea I would throw around. Maybe 50 is a little bit of a too harsh nerf, but considering how strong they are, that you are just always automatically bringing 3 of them, I think 50 is a good first step. If you just go ham and increase the points by 75 or even 100, which I've seen suggested over on Reddit, that is a little bit much. Make it incremental. GW has all the options to increase the points, decrease the points, however many times they want. And yeah, with the frequent updates that they have promised overall on the Warhammer community articles and so on, I think 50 per Fire Prism is a great first step. And at that point, we'll see if they are still too cheap, if they feel too cheap, and then GW can just go ahead and adjust it yet again and increase the points by another maybe 25 points or something to bring them up to approximately 200 points, at which point they are probably going to be a bit expensive. So yeah, that would be my suggestion for the support turrets and the Fire Prism. I would not decrease the lethality if devastating wounds are going to get changed, somewhat similarly to what was brought up over on social media with, one devastating wound trigger means 1 additional mortal wound in addition to the damage. I think that would be fine. But I would not decrease their lethality. Don't touch their strength, number of attacks, AP, damage, all of that is fine. Devastating wounds are the problem and the points. So if you change devastating wounds and increase the points, I think both units are going to be absolutely fine. Now as for the rest of the Aeldari codex or index, there are a lot of units that are still very strong. Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades are some standouts, but those can see just points increases. And that should be good enough in combination with the changes to devastating wounds. As you've noticed, I would much prefer that you change devastating wounds across the board because it affects most armies, and leave the general lethality of a Wraith Cannon or of the Wraith weapons in general, be it on a Wraith Knight or a Wraith Lord or whatever, intact. Because the strength is something that Aeldari have for them, and thus most of their units, and Wraiths are a little bit of a bad example, are squishy. So yeah, you have a lot of counterplay against them as well. A short range, no invulnerable save. There is counterplay there. It is all about devastating wounds and a little bit about the points. And yeah, with that, it kind of turned a little bit into an Aeldari index review because a lot of their rules are kind of shaping the meta as it stands. Don't get me wrong, I understand we are just 3 or 4 days into 10th edition. But it still makes sense to talk about all these things, and I have to make content, right? So I just want to talk about it because I have clear thoughts. And whenever I read that someone wants to just change fate dice to be less fun, that's just not nice to read because I personally also play Aeldari. I don't own a Wraith Knight, but I have some Fire Prisms and I've tried them out, and I have some support turrets and I've tried them out, and they are very good. And so are all the Wraith units that I've played. Although I play Yanden and I don't have a Wraith Knight, which is a little bit weird. So I'm probably going to pick one up, even if they nerf them, because it's a cool model and it fits in my Yanden army. As for the rest of the index, I don't think the rest of the index is that great. I'll be honest, there are some standouts. We have Rangers, which are pretty decent. We have the Incarnate, if you're playing Inari, which is really good. We have the Avatar of Cain, which is really good. But when it comes to the core of what the Aeldari are, and that is for me the Aspect Warriors, they are all bad, and the design for them is all just terrible. I hate it. They are way too cheap, and they are way too hoardy to be any cool. There's nothing cool about them. They need to be way more expensive and also way harder hitting. I would like if Howling Banshees were actually 25 points or something, and if they would hit insanely hard. We are talking strength 5, AP -2, damage 2, or AP -3, damage 2, something ridiculous with a lot of attacks. Because as it stands, Howling Banshees are just, compared to a lot of other factions and their dedicated melee units, they are just bad. They just seem so weird to me. They have access to the Executioner Blade, but that is obviously just for one model. And yeah, the same more or less applies to the Phoenix Lords as well. I've made a mind map whenever I've tried to figure out the Aeldari and how their design process might have looked like. And as you can see on the mind map, you can pause the video if it's kind of going to disappear really soon, but I don't know. The mind map itself is me going through just the basic steps of looking at an army, understanding their identity, and breaking it down. And what I did here was, as you can see on the right hand side, there is a kind of aspect warrior Phoenix Lord kind of thing. And I shared my thoughts there where I said, this is how Phoenix Lords might be looking like, what should be the design. And there are three main options that I see for Phoenix Lords. Name character tier, which is the weakest one, Chapter Master, which is a little bit stronger, and then Primarch tier is really damn good. And what differentiates them is their power level and the points they cost. Each of them have their own points roster. So a named character, usually in 10th edition as it seems, is between 100 and 150 points. A Chapter Master is between 151 and approximately 250. And anything above that is more or less Primarch tier, which is really expensive, and at that point your character better slaps, because otherwise they are not going to be worth the points. And as it stands, the way that GW presents Phoenix Lords and the way their new models look like, they are smaller than Primarchs. They are not going to be anywhere their level, and it seems that GW did not intend that for them, which is fine. But as they are right now, they are little better than a regular named character from any other Space Marine faction and from any other faction. There's nothing that makes them special, that makes them stand out, and that makes them feel like Phoenix Lords. Phoenix Lords in the lore are badasses, and that should be at least somewhat supported. So I wish that every Phoenix Lord would go up to between 151 and 250 points and really slap. Get 3 rules per Phoenix Lord, killer weapons, a better stat line, a slightly better defensive profile to make them a tiny bit more survivable, and give them a unit of aspect warriors that really supports them and really destroys whatever their target is. Because what's great about aspect units is, or what was great about them, is that they're highly specialized, very easy to kill, but whenever they hit their target, whenever they hit whatever they're intended for, they are going to destroy it, no matter what it is. And it doesn't feel like it. One of the better examples I wanted to give are Fire Dragons. If you look at Space Marines, I know they are a bad example because Space Marines can do everything. But if you compare Fire Dragons to, say, a unit of Eradicators, Fire Dragons were the specialized, super dedicated anti-vehicle or anti-monster unit. And GW still wanted to go with that. The Fire Pike and so on, they are still decent. We are talking about strength 12, and you have a short destruction with wound reroll of 1 and a damage reroll of 1. But consider that you are having one attack with the Melta 3 rule, so you need to be very, very close, and you're hitting on 3s, and at that point you're strength 12. So most of the regular vehicles, like a Repulsor Executioner and those kinds of vehicles, you're winning on a 4. So the likelihood of you destroying something like a Repulsor Executioner with a squad of Fire Dragons is relatively low. If they are led by their Phoenix Lord and so on, that might change a little bit. But I think that the Fire Dragons at their current range and at their weapon profiles and at their kind of, whatever their ability is with the reroll of 1 for wounds and a damage reroll of 1, they are just not dedicated and specialized enough. Make them more expensive, but make them reroll both of them completely if you wanted to. A reroll for a wound roll, it all makes sense, but also a damage reroll could be very easy implemented if you just specify the clause that you have to go with the second result. And yeah, you can just do it once. That would be it. That would be a really cool way to go about Fire Dragons. And other than that, their short range and so on is part of their identity. It makes sense. But I feel like for whatever they are doing, they actually don't quite measure up with what Eradicators are offering, despite the Eradicator's weapon being objectively worse. And it is something very, very weird, because Eradicators have, for 1, way more shots, and for 2, they have better abilities, or a better ability, and they have better support. And at that point, the Fire Dragons kind of, I don't know, they are not that interesting at that point. So yeah, and that applies to most of the aspect units. I think I've seen a lot of people play Dire Avengers, so those seem to be fine. Maybe you're only bringing them because they're so points efficient, or maybe because they're so cheap. But when it comes to Fire Dragons, Howling Banshees, Striking Scorpions, and so on, I'm personally not a big fan of them, and I think they should have been approached from a completely different angle. That is just something I wanted to share in addition to the rest I've talked about. So if you have any thoughts on the Aeldari, any thoughts on Devastating Wounds, Fate Dice, in the current state of a couple of different rules. There's also something to talk about, like Overwatch. A lot of people really dislike that rule, although it brings a lot of punch to the game, especially for ranged units. But maybe there are some elegant changes to be made there. I would personally leave Overwatch as it is, but decrease the range of Overwatch from 24 to 18 inches. That is just my approach to that stratagem. And yeah, other things that you want to talk about. If you have any rules that you want to have discussed or anything, drop them down in the comments below. I either cover them in a video in the future, or I'm going to just talk with you about it in the comments, which would be fine as well. Last but not least, remember that tomorrow we are going to get Combat Patrol rules, Combat Patrol data cards, and all that good stuff. At that point, all the Combat Patrol mayhem is going to start. I'm going to play a lot of Combat Patrol games tomorrow and in the following days, so expect a lot of Combat Patrol content. I'm not going to rush anything because I want to make those Combat Patrol videos as insightful and as helpful as possible, but I'm intending to bring out the Combat Patrol videos at least next week, maybe a little bit faster, maybe already on the weekend, who knows. But I want to start by testing a little bit and still getting into the edition first. So if you have any Combat Patrols you want me to start with or anything, or you want me to take a look at, drop all of that in the comments below as well. So yeah, I hope this was insightful. It's a little bit of a longer video as always, but it is what it is. We are talking about design, we are having fun. It's 10th edition, so I hope you take it easy. So yeah, see you in the next one. Take care.